something that's going to be fruitful for your life. If a tree could feel, pruning would hurt. But a tree doesn't feel as we do, but we do feel, so pruning often does hurt. Even, God can often use, pruning can happen through a conflict, can happen through a crisis, can happen through, a million ways. And a relationship can end and it can be God's, sometimes a relationship can end and it's not God, but a relationship can end and it can be God's pruning. And it doesn't feel good, or you can lose something, it doesn't feel good, but God is pruning, so something new is coming. Branches can get diseased. I remember one time Rogeri gave me a word, he talked about some diseased branches, and God has to do that. He did his thing, but it's true. Branches, one of the reasons for pruning is branches can be diseased, and you have to cut it off before it affects the whole tree. It can be in your life. It could be it could be a bad attitude. It could be a seed of gossip that comes in your life. A seed of bitterness. It's a diseased thing, and you got to cut it off before it affects the rest of your life. And that can happen again in the body as well. Disease, someone can start out okay, but then they start getting negative, divisive, whatever that is. God is guarding his life, in your life and in the body. A dead branch will at some point decay back to the tree or back to the healthy stem, causing problems and hindering the life. So now often those dead branches break off by themselves, because they get dried up. But God will take away that which is dead from a body and take away that which is dead from our lives. God, if something's dead, God wants it out. Now it goes on to say, I'm reading in the handbook or regarding being pruned or how it happens in the natural, the falling off of the dead or diseased branch is normally a slow process, but can be shortened by high winds, extremities, storms. In other words, if you have a tree and it's got dead branches and a storm comes, look at what happens with a hurricane. Storm comes, the dead branches are the first to fall off. That means God can use storms in our life to prune us. God can use the very things we hate and we say, Lord, why are you doing this? The storms will act to prune us and take away dead things. And in ministries as well, storms will allow the dead things to fall off. The issue of pruning, it's so much filled, so applicable to every single part of our life. In ministry, that which is not performing the function anymore that it was set up for is something in line for pruning. It's easy to get into just doing things and not doing the same thing without the life anymore, where you're doing it on the outside, like a branch is there on the outside, but it's not bearing the fruit. You can be doing the things, going through the motions, what once came from your heart, it's not from your heart, it's become dead. That's prunable. This applies to us in every way. Everything you do, you can look at your own life as a branch or a tree where you're putting energy in, you're putting time in, you're putting resources into doing things. Every moment of your life is something you're putting into, you're spending, and some things are not producing fruit for God. Not producing anything. They're not functioning. It could be something that once did bear fruit, but it's not bearing fruit now. Now it's a branch of your life that's taking up your energy. Ruts, routines that are not bearing. Or something that God, again, you let unforgiveness in your heart, you're deadening your branches right there. Or a sin, when you sin, that's an example right there, because when we sin, we're putting energy into something that is not bearing fruit. It's bearing death, and you're putting your energy. It's a dead branch, it's a diseased branch. Every time you sin, just know it's not only what you're doing, it's what you're not doing. You're taking energy and life and focus and thought and time away from what you could be doing, bearing fruit, putting it into something that's bearing no fruit. A habit that you keep doing that's bearing nothing for God. And God is saying, cut it off. Cut it off because it grieves God, and cut it off because it harms you. Prune your life. Cut off the sinful branches. Know that it's not only sin, it is a dead thing in your life. It is robbing you, draining you in every way. It could be a disease. It could be something you've had since childhood, an attitude, or something you carried with you, a weight or a burden or a shame, something that's weighing you down. cut it off. You may be trying to deal with something your whole life, rejection or whatever, getting acceptance. Cut it off. It's draining you. It's long enough to go on with your life to have been a victim. But being a victim doesn't bear any fruit. Being a victim, and listen, people may have done terrible things, but you are still not a victim in God, because God doesn't say you are a victim. God says you are a victor. That's a different victor. So you may have had all these things. That may all be true, and that may be all that. But you can't live like that, and you can't live in that identity of what's been done to you. Because when you do that, you become defined by what people did to you instead of what God did for you and what you can do to the world. So you can't be defined, and you also don't want to be defined by people's negative junk, and then you become defined by the sin that they did. You can't go through your life as broken. Cut off that wounded spirit. Cut off cut off the self-pity, cut off the identity that is not what God has for you. And that will never bear fruit. And say, okay, it happened, but you know what? I deserved worse than what they did for me. I deserve hell, and I got heaven. So I'm not a victim. I'm someone who's been blessed with what I didn't deserve. And then you'll bear. Next rule of pruning, listen, from the article. In general, the smaller the branch that is cut, the easier it is for the plant to compartmentalize the wound. It is therefore preferable to make any necessary structural pruning to young plants when possible, rather than removing large, poorly placed branches from mature plants. What's it saying here? It's better to prune early than later. It's better to prune bad habits when they begin or when they're early than when they're later. It's better to prune a bad attitude when it begins. It's harder to do it later. You still can do it. But it's much easier to do it as soon as it comes in. The sinful temptation, prune it off as soon as it comes in. Much easier to deal with that little thing than to deal with a big thing entrenched in your life. Better to prune yourself early. And because the more you let it go, not only does it get stronger, also it has robbed you more. It has robbed you as it increased. You still can take it off, but it takes more. And you want to see again how